Watani Stiner was once one of the most wanted men in America, accused of the shooting deaths of two Black Panther leaders on the campus of UCLA. Watani Stiner said he was innocent of the crimes he was accused of, but the courts disagreed, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But while for most people that would have been the end to their story, for Watani Stiner, it was just the beginning. Larry Watani Stiner was born on January 30th, 1948, in Houston, Texas. He was born during a time when southern states had laws that enforced racial segregation, and his first few years of life were spent going to segregated playgrounds and movie theaters, even beaches. So to get away from the legalized racial discrimination of Texas, Watani's mother moved the family to Southern California when he was 7 years old. They moved into the housing projects located in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles. Watts didn't have the laws that enforced segregation like Texas did, but there was still extreme racism in Los Angeles that included police brutality. This type of racism caused anger in communities like Watts, and in 1965, when Watani was 17 years old, that anger exploded. The Watts Rebellion, brought on by the mistreatment of LA police officers, it lasted 6 days and resulted in widespread rioting, looting, and community devastation. 4 months before the Watts riots, Watani Stiner had graduated from high school, gotten a good job, got married, and he and his wife were expecting their first child. Life for Watani was good. But after the Watts riots, something inside him changed. Fighting for injustice felt right, and Watani was done with just accepting racism. He became motivated by words like those of Malcolm X, who taught to demand freedom and justice by any means necessary. One night in 1966, Watani came across a group of young Black men and women speaking in a language that he'd never heard before. The group invited Watani to join them and explained that they were speaking Swahili, the native language of East Africa. He then learned that many from the group were part of an organization called US, founded by Ron Karenga in 1965. US was a cultural nationalist organization that came from the idea of us versus them.
Indeed. And welcome to another episode, everyone. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. And as you just heard, Watani Stiner of the organization US. It did not only just stand for us against them. It stood for United Slaves. And as she just alluded to, Ron Karenga was the leader of this organization. Ron Karenga is, of course, the individual who came up with Kwanzaa, the Christmas as it relates to the Black culture. The Black Panthers and the U.S. organization had a war. I remember this war. I know the history of this war. And as do many Black organizations and many Black factions, to this day, obviously, are at odds and at war with one another. So was the case with these two groups, the Black Panthers and US. They had a shootout one time on, I believe it was on a campus or something. This is what she's talking about, actually, Watani Stiner, in which two individuals from the Black Panther Party were deleted during this shootout, and Watani Stiner was accused of this. He then went to prison and escaped prison. The story gets wild. Let's continue.
US's goal was Black self-determination, and they believed that Black people should reject views and values.
And that's Ron Karenga right there, I believe. This one right here in the middle. That's him right there. That's Ron Karenga.
Of the oppressors. Watani shared these beliefs and joined the US organization. He changed his name from his birth name Larry to the African name Watani, and he became dedicated to a revolutionary change. Watani's brother also became a member of US. Another group fighting for change was the widely recognized Black Panther Party. Although very different groups, the US organization and the Black Panthers did agree on one thing: that society as a whole was racist and radical change was needed. But the US organization defined that change as the need to focus on promoting traditional African culture, whereas the Black Panthers argued that Black people in America had already established a culture and didn't need to embrace African traditions. But while the Black Panthers and the US organization were busy debating, the United States government was putting together a plan to take both groups down. The plan was called COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. The government's COINTEL program, which was ran by the FBI, was designed to disrupt, discredit, and destroy all potential Black leadership in the country.
Yes, and they did a great job at it, a meticulous job, did COINTELPRO, headed by J. Edgar Hoover, who was a staunch racist and had a healthy disdain for Black people in general, and then Black leaders. And, J. Edgar Hoover came up with this COINTELPRO, and he started a war, an internal war inside of the Black Panther Party, because COINTELPRO began to send letters to Huey P. Newton, and the letters were fake and fabricated, and they came from COINTELPRO from the FBI. But they made the letters seem like they came from Eldridge Cleaver, another member of the Black Panther Party, a leader of the Black Panther Party in a different chapter. And in these letters, they would say that Huey P. Newton was under threat, that he was a coward, this, that, and the other. And Huey P. Newton thought that these letters were coming from Eldridge Cleaver. They were really coming from COINTELPRO. They dismantled the Black Panther Party. They also sent Martin Luther King a letter, did COINTELPRO, did the FBI, and told Martin Luther King that he needed to off himself. That he needed to off himself because they had proof that he was a womanizer. And in order to maintain his legacy, that they would not put this out there as long as he offed himself.
To do this, the FBI sent letters with death threats to leaders from each group, but made the letters appear to be sent from the other group, so that each would believe that the other group was threatening them. And this plan worked. It created so much tension and hostility between us.
And that plan should not have worked. It's really a knock, if you will, on the leadership, the hierarchy of the movement of these separate factions, particularly of the Black Panther Party. Eldridge Cleaver fell for the banana in the tailpipe, and so did Huey P. Newton. Eldridge Cleaver believed that Huey P. Newton was coming for him, had a hit on him, and were making derogatory remarks about him and his leadership and etc. So based upon these letters, and these letters put these two at odds and many others inside of the movement, to where it caused such internal strife and acrimony that eventually dismantled the movement. They later found out, of course, what we all know now, that all of this stuff came from COINTELPRO. This is something that they should have investigated then, should have known, the nature of the beast, the nature of their opposition, and that they would stop at no lengths to dismantle them. But somehow they fell for this, and it really killed the whole movement.
And the Black Panthers, that neither group trusted the other. In the fall of 1969, Watani was attending courses at UCLA. Other US members and Black Panthers were also attending school there. Members from both groups were part of the UCLA Campus Black Student Union, which meant, even though there was tension because of the forged FBI letters, both the groups still had to work together on certain issues regarding Black students. One of these issues was the appointing of a new director for the Afro-American Studies Center. But the US organization and the Black Panthers disagreed on who that new director should be. So on January 17, 1969, members from both groups gathered in UCLA's Campbell Hall to have a meeting to discuss the matter. But just as the meeting was ending, there was a deadly shootout that left 2 Black Panther leaders dead.
At approximately 2:45 p.m. this afternoon, 2 men were murdered at the UCLA campus. Their names are John Huggins, 23 years old, and Al Prentice Carter, 26 years old. They were attending a meeting at the campus where the Black students were discussing the qualifications for the director of the Afro-American Studies Center.
The next day, the Los Angeles Police Department put out an all-points bulletin for the arrests of Watani Stiner and his brother, George.
As I said, I recall that situation. I mean, I wasn't there. I wasn't even born. I was born in 1974, but I recall the situation through my studies. What happened there, they were already beefing these 2 organizations. They were showing up there to, decide who was going to head or lead a particular situation. A fight broke out, a conflict broke out, an argument broke out. They were already at odds with one another. And the shootout took place. Bunchy Carter was a prominent member of the Black Panther Party, and so was John Huggins. This is why they were there. And both of them were deleted, killed on that day right there at the UCLA campus, which ignited and intensified the beef and the war that these 2 factions or organizations, freedom fighter organizations, had going on. Just couldn't get along and unite and settle and submerge whatever differences that they had. And, obviously we're all better. We all have the same goal, which is freedom. Just they had different routes to get there, but these things can be resolved and settled, and we unite and come together. How strong would these 2 groups have been together as opposed to being at odds with one another, which really helped to cripple the movement, or, it at least didn't help to advance the movement in a way that it could have and would have been advanced had they not been at odds with one another. Shameful that the leaders couldn't come together, sit down, and hash out their differences, in a non-violent manner between each other, non-violent, and find a way to unite and come together and further the cause. Instead, this hindered it in many ways. But Watani Stiner, he was, the one accused of deleting John Huggins and Bunchy Carter. They're right there on the campus.
George Ali Stiner. 3 days after that, Watani turned himself in and was arrested for the murder of John Huggins and Bunchy Carter. But police knew at the time of Watani's arrest that he wasn't the actual shooter. Witnesses had already identified 21-year-old Claude Herbert as the man behind the trigger. But because Watani and Claude Herbert were both members of the US organization, And because Watani was there with Claude Herbert at the time of the shooting, Watani was booked for conspiracy to commit murder. But from day one of his arrest, Watani maintained his innocence, telling his attorney there was never a conspiracy to kill John Huggins or Bunchy Carter. Watani called the shooting a spontaneous event provoked by an argument. Watani stated that just as the meeting on the UCLA campus was ending, a heated argument broke out between an US member and a female member of the Black Panthers. This argument escalated into a fight between both groups that resulted in shots being fired from both sides. Watani was hit in the shoulder. John Huggins and Bunchy Carter both hit in the chest. But during Watani's trial, the district attorney for the prosecution and the Black Panther Party told a different version of what happened that day. They stated that US member Claude Herbert arrived at the UCLA meeting with a plan to kill John Huggins and Bunchy Carter, and that Watani Stiner and his brother were in on the plan. Watani's defense argued back that there was no evidence to prove such a conspiracy, but a judge disagreed. Watani Stiner and his brother were convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and sentenced to 7 years to life in prison. Watani was 21 years old. Claude Herbert, the man who shot and killed John Huggins and Bunchy Carter, immediately went on the run after the shooting. He escaped out of the country and was never caught. 5 years into Watani's life sentence at California's San Quentin prison, he started to believe his life was in real danger. His outspokenness and political views had made him a target, and he got a tip that prison guards might be setting him up to be killed. So a sympathetic black prison guard and a vocational counselor agreed to help Watani and his brother escape. In the middle of the night, on March 30th, 1974, Watani and his brother rolled up their pillows and blankets and stuffed them under their bed sheets to make it look like they were sleeping. They made their way through a back door to the outside of the prison, ran 50 yards across the grass, and climbed over an 8-foot-high cement wall to a waiting car. Behind, they left a note for their parents that read, "Dear Moms and Pops, sorry we had to do it like this, but circumstances demanded it." Watani and his brother disguised themselves as traveling preachers and made their way out of the country to South America, where other black prisoners were also living in exile. Here, Watani stayed for 20 years. He got remarried and had children. But living in South America was not easy, and at times it was dangerous. Watani became concerned for the safety of his wife and children. So in 1994, he walked into the U.S. Embassy and negotiated his surrender, on the terms that the U.S. government would grant his family entry to the United States. Watani's brother stayed in South America. Many connected to the case, including Watani, assumed that because he had served 5 years before his escape and had turned himself back in, that he would only do a few more years of his 7 years to life sentence. But what they hadn't realized was that after Watani escaped to South America, the government labeled him a domestic terrorist and international fugitive. So after his return, he was sent back to San Quentin for another 21 years. On January 11th, 2015, Watani Stiner was released from prison after serving a total of 26 years. Since being released from prison, Watani's been featured in many articles and interviews. And although he maintains he's innocent of what sent him to prison all those years ago, he does express sadness for what happened that day at UCLA in 1969 and for the lives that were lost. Today, Watani continues his work towards social justice, using stories and history from his generation to give strength to the next generation.
Indeed. Wow. Rest in peace to John Huggins and Bunchy Carter. Let me know what you all think in the comments. And there you have it. Watani said that an argument broke out, that it was nothing pre-planned, that it was a spontaneous double murder. Conflict arose. Weapons were drawn. He was also shot. One of them were also shot in the shoulder. So the Panthers had shot back. It's just two of them got, the story is, and the jury believed as well, and so does everyone else. And, the story was that it was not some argument that broke out, that it was indeed a planned attack against the Black Panthers, that they had indeed went there. As I said, they were already at a war, or involved in a war, involved in a conflict, these two groups, the Black Panthers and the U.S. So that the U.S., these individuals, Watani and his brother and the others, had went there to do just that, to what they ended up doing, to take out Bunchy Carter, a prominent member of the Black Panther Party, and John Huggins, and they ended up doing that, because they were at war and they wanted to really take over some things. I mean, it gets deep, but there you have it, man. Watani, Stiner, nobody wins in this situation, of course. The one dude, he got away, didn't escape, he never was caught. The one dude that was allegedly involved in the double murder, and Watani was free for 20 years in South America and only turned himself in after he escaped from prison. Him and his brother escaped. That's wild. They got out of there and it was gone for 20 years. And probably would have still been out. He turned himself in, saying, under these conditions, you let my family go back to America. He didn't feel safe anymore, so he turned himself in. Other than that, he was out. It's not like they caught up to him. He was out for 20 years after he had escaped with no end in sight. I guess they wasn't hot on his trail or anything. It doesn't look like, but he thought he was going to come back and do a couple of years, since he had already did 5 years or so. And he had 7 years to life, as we heard, but instead he ended up doing another 20 odd years. But he's free now, and living his life. But there you have it, man. They just can't get along, and just sort of help to dissipate the movement and water down the movement when these groups were at odds with one another, and particularly with COINTELPRO, with the FBI sending around these letters and these individuals believing that the letter is coming from another leader, and the letters were chastising them. These letters were threatening them, saying that their life is in danger, calling them out of their names, calling them cowards and all this. I mean, these are very serious, disturbing letters that these individuals were receiving, believing that they're coming from who the letter says that they're coming from. Eldridge Cleaver, Huey P. Newton, they got the address on there. This is the FBI. They done cooked it all up. They got it looking legit, like it came from the post office. I mean, they didn't cook it all. It look, you're not going to know the difference. You thinking Huey P. Newton sent you this letter. This is where it says it came from. I mean, we know all of this now, but at the time they're looking at this saying, what? They're not understanding that this is the FBI that is putting all of this into play. We know this now. Things would have been different. This is the FBI. This is the government, the same FBI that deliberately went in there and killed a 21-year-old Fred Hampton. It was a government-sponsored deletion, and That's what these people will kill you. That's what it is. But there it is, Watani Stiner and the beef that they had, his escape. Wild story, I would say. Stay safe and stay free, people.